Good evening. On the air, the program Time. Arriving in Moscow, the acting head of the Ukrainian government, Evgeny Marchuk, held a series of meetings today with the top leadership of Russia. The main objective of the visit is to prepare for the Russian-Ukrainian summit, where the agreement on friendship and cooperation and partnership between our countries is to be signed. At the meeting of Boris Yeltsin with Evgeny Marchuk, there was discussion of the drafts of the political agreement between Russia and Ukraine and the agreement on the Black Sea Fleet. The president stated that the Russian side, considering the several times of requests and wishes expressed by the Ukrainian leadership, may agree with the formulation proposed in the agreement on the territorial wholeness and inviolability of borders. The press service of the president stated that the agreement was not achieved on the Black Sea Fleet because of the unbending position of the Ukrainian side. Boris Yeltsin emphasized that Russia is committed to previously achieved agreements and won't accept any compromises or concessions. The economic aspects of the two-sided relations prevailed at the dialogues of the Ukrainian delegation with the Russian Prime Minister Viktor Chernomyrdin and his first deputy Alexis Kovets. The Russian side stated specifically that Ukraine, for the first time in 2 years, has begun regular payments on the foreign debt to Russia. At the same time, the Russian premier drew Evgeny Marchuk's attention to Ukraine's non-payment for deliveries of Russian natural gas and warned that in the event of non-payment on schedule, the extension to liquidate the debt will become invalid. Alexis Kovets was more optimistic in his assessment of the mutual relations. He told the press that the draft on a large-scale agreement is virtually ready. What remains are disputed questions of borders and citizenship, which experts will resolve in the next days. However, not all members of the Russian delegation share that optimism, so the Deputy Commander-in-Chief of the Combat Naval Forces of Russia, Igor Kosatonov, feels that Ukrainians' approach to the division of the fleet is discriminatory and unacceptable for Russia. Yet, despite the remaining differences, the acting Ukrainian Prime Minister does not exclude that the full-scale agreement may be signed prior to celebrating the 50th anniversary of victory. In an exclusive interview to the program Time, Evgeny Marchuk called his trip to Moscow fruitful and constructive. I feel that the visit not only very fundamentally clarified many issues, but as a result of this visit, we have more lucidity in how to most effectively cooperate and build our relations, foremost in the economic sphere. It was quite unsettled since morning today in the capital of Crimea, Simferopol, with details our personal correspondence. Although the Ukrainian parliament declined the proposal of Vyacheslav Chernovolov to immediately dissolve the Supreme Soviet of Crimea, and in Simferopol a sigh of relief could have been breathed, but alarm hit close to home. An anonymous bomb threat was received in the building. All the deputies and employees were immediately evacuated, and only a few people remained, including Yuri Mishkov, in his presidential office. Field engineers found nothing, and at that very same time near the city council building, this was what was going on. According to the new law of Ukraine on the Autonomous Republic, the national symbolism of Crimea cannot be used independently and only together with Ukrainian symbolism, and here is what the attempt to raise the Ukrainian flag over the city council building resulted in. In the tussle, several people were injured, including the cameraman of NTV. The trained fellows couldn't break through the picket line of the old inhabitants of Simferopol, and at this hour when we were reporting over the city council, as previously, there was one flag, the Crimean, just as over the Supreme Soviet and the government building. According to information from Metartas, 50 deputies of the Supreme Soviet of Crimea out of 98 condemned the address of Sergei Tsekov to the State Duma of Russia, feeling it was provocational and an undignified action of a politician. Today they turned to Ukrainian parliament with a request to dissolve the current Supreme Soviet of the autonomy in accordance with the Constitution of Ukraine. Now briefly about other events of the day. 80 military personnel were found who were considered to be missing in action in Chechnya. Sergei Shakharai today stated that he does not intend to run in the presidential elections of 1996. In Pskov, festivities were held in honor of the victory of the soldiers of Alexander Nevsky over the Teutonic Knights. On the territory of Chechnya currently, there are two major hubs of resistance to federal forces remaining on the part of the unlawful militarized groups in the southeast of the republic, near the populated point Videna, and in the west, near the village Bamut. This Interfax was told in the press service of the United Contingent of Russian Forces in Mozdok today. As a result of the actions of the internal affairs forces of the Ministry of Internal Affairs, without losses among the local population and the internal forces, the northern part of the populated point Bamut was taken. This evening, Interfax was told by the press center of the Common United Federal Forces. According to the press center, the forces have established strongholds at assigned parameters currently. In the last while, more than 80 Russian military personnel were found who were listed as missing in action in Chechnya. This was told to Interfax by the deputy head of the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Russia, the Colonel General Vyacheslav Zhirevtsov. According to the general, some of those soldiers were released from prison. Others who had abandoned their units were found at their places of residence. Overall, since the beginning of the deployment in Chechnya on the 11th of December last year of the federal forces, almost 300 military personnel are missing or unaccounted for. 200 from among the ranks of the unlawful militarized groups with refugees' papers have been dispatched to Grozny to conduct diversionary activities and terrorist actions. This was stated to a correspondent of Vitartas in Mozdok, citing information of the operative team of the Federal Security Service by the Deputy Director of the Federal Security Service, Major General Nikolai Kavadov. Our self-sacrificing correspondent, Grigory Brizna, who has been working in Chechnya for several months, today sent another report. His topic is the condition of the oil processing sector of the Republic. Just a few years ago, the yield of all the oil boreholes on the territory of Chechnya was 20 million tons per year. The capacity of oil companies of Grozny were intended also for processing of oil transported here from Tyumen and Stavropol. In the construction of the largest currently idle plants called Lenin, Sheripov, and Anisimov, the entire country participated. The central gas fractionating installation was the pride of the oil workers, and this plant, equipped with the latest technologies and equipment, today is also at a standstill. Many facilities and sites of the plant have been closed for several years. The reason is the flow out of Chechnya of Russian-speaking population. It comprised the basic backbone of the engineering technical personnel of the sector. To restore and revive these plants won't require much of an effort. This is the opinion of specialists after conducting an expert inventory. At the majority of plants, destruction is insignificant. Damaged most severely were containers to store oil products. Many of them will be impossible to restore. There must also be a collection of spilled oil and recultivation of the soil to be held. Information about destruction and extensive casualties among the peaceful population in the Chechen village Samashka, as reported in Moscow by the Society Memorial, was significantly exaggerated. This was said in an interview to Interfax by the head of the Committee of the State Duma investigating reasons which led to the crisis in the Chechen Republic, Stanislav Gavarukhin. Together with other members of the Commission, he returned yesterday from Samashki. Each day, returning to Grozny are approximately 5,000 people. The overall number of residents now has exceeded 230,000. Today in the city, the danger number one is the flare-up of epidemics. Our special correspondent, Natalia Prokofyeva, has just returned from Grozny. This is how the building of the center of this state sanitary epidemic control in Grozny looks. The roof is damaged and equipment as well. But the building of the Republican Center, according to specialists, cannot be restored at all. We have no alternative. And the Republican Center of Sanitary and Epidemic Control will have to function. But for now, sanitary physicians work in tents. Devices and agents have been brought in and laboratories equipped. Here they live as well, guarded by special designation units. The first sanitary epidemic brigades from the Stavropol Anti-Plague Institute in the beginning of the year worked in Znamenskaya and in February rebased themselves to Grozny. Now, together with the medical workers of the Republic, we are doing a preventative immunization of the population. A sufficient volume of laboratory control over the quality of drinking water is in place. Today on Chechen territory, physicians report 450 infectious diseases. Apprehensions are generated by cholera outbreaks as a result of last year when the battle with it was neglected. The danger of plague. There are natural hubs and anti-plague services, in essence, is also virtually destroyed. Hepatitis, diphtheria, and etc. Now, much must be set up anew. blocks and areas are checked. Potential carriers are singled out. In hospitals, infectious wings are opened. It's known that epidemics always follow in the tracks of war, and often they take more lives than combat. But today, the medics view the future with some optimism. The main thing is that they are in control of the situation. About events on the Tajik-Afghan border. On Monday night, the Russian border troops prevented several attempts of the gunmen of the Tajik opposition to cross the border from Afghanistan to Tajikistan in the zone of the Panjsk Border Regiment. This interfax was told in the press center of the group of the Russian border forces in Tajikistan. In the opinion of the analytical service of the Russian border forces, the gunmen of the movement of the Islamic Rebirth of Tajikistan are preparing for a repeated attack on Russian border outposts. Meanwhile, the delegation of the government of Tajikistan to conduct the inter-Tajik consultations arrived in Moscow. It's headed by the first Vice Premier of Tajikistan, Mahmad Saeed Abaidullayev. The beginning of the consultation is planned for tomorrow. Today also the delegation of the oppositional movement of Islamic Rebirth of Tajikistan arrived, headed by Akbar Turajanzadeh. About perspectives of the talks, our observer Alexander Shkiradze speculates. I think that after the tragic events which occurred during the last days on the Tajik-Afghan border, no one will dare to predict the results of yet another, this time Moscow meeting, although it's intended to put an end to civil war in Tajikistan, in which for several years already Russian soldiers have been drawn in. It's characteristic that during the time which lapsed since the last 3 rounds of inter-Tajik talks under the aegis of the UN and with the mediation of Moscow, much was said about the adherence to peaceful resolution of the bloody conflict. As a result, it's strange the force option was chosen. Also, both sides equally blame each other. The Russian border troops are also criticized, although not because they foresaw a new phase of war. In general, this was not concealed in an exclusive interview to our program by one of the most influential Islamic leaders of Tajikistan, Haji Akbar Turajanzadeh. An impression is created that with each round of talks in the inter-Tajik dialogue, there are more problems, not less. With this, involuntarily, a question arises: are the Tajiks capable at all to find a common language and stop this senseless war? We feel that the 4th round of talks is not the last, it's only the beginning. To date, we, during the 3 rounds and 2 consultations, discussed new main political questions. At all times, these talks were only focused on becoming acquainted with each other and come closer in our positions. Most important questions were regarding a temporary ceasefire and to exchange prisoners of war and political prisoners and bring the UN observers into Tajikistan. These were all major achievements, but still the most important things are ahead, and we have not decided anything yet. The delay in the 4th round of talks is not between the Tajiks. Here, there are contradictions, unfortunately, between the opposition and the Russian side. We are demanding from Russia that Russia should recognize the Tehran agreement on the temporary ceasefire on the Tajik-Afghan border, because the border is guarded by Russia. And if Russia doesn't recognize it, this ceasefire means nothing. We never demanded that Russia should be one of the sides in the talks. We demand only one thing, that Russia should undertake that its armed forces and also the border troops which are deployed in Tajikistan during the carrying out of their military duties will not violate the given agreement. The problems of the coming elections were discussed today at the session of the deputy heads of the organs of executive power and representatives of the electoral commissions of the subjects of the Russian Federation. Despite the fact that the law adopted by the Duma on the elections of the President and Duma were not ratified by the Federative Council, representatives of the Russian state rule began to prepare for elections. And at today's session, they invited the chairman of the regional electoral commissions and also representatives from the administrations of the subjects of the federations, that is, those people who, on location, are in charge of the electoral process. As was noted by the head of the administration of the President, Sergei Filatov, the organization of Duma elections and preparations to form a federative council are one of the objectives of the year. Considering the experience of the previous election campaigns, these elections can't be held without radical changes in legislation, which directly depends on the deputies themselves. And the Central Election Commission, even with an unratified law, is actively preparing for elections and developed an automated system for elections. In the opinion of the chairman of of the Central Election Commission, Nikolai Ryabov, the system will help to economize on the Duma elections around 40 billion rubles, and so that citizens could fully realize their right to elect and be elected. It was proposed that by the 5th of June, a general registration of voters be completed. The Vice Premier of Russia, the leader of the Party of Russian Unity and Accord, Sergei Shachrai, does not intend to run in the presidential elections of 1996. This he said today in Novosibirsk at a meeting with the local chapter of the party. The economics minister, Yevgeny Yasin, refuted in an interview to a correspondent of the agency Financial Information a report about ostensible preparations within the government of proposals to change the system of defining the currency rate of the ruble. The question of instituting a fixed rate of the ruble against the dollar is not in the agenda, he stated. Meanwhile, at the Moscow Currency Exchange today, the rate of the ruble against the dollar grew by 2 positions and was at the level of 5,064 rubles against $1 US. The dismissal notices are being received by 1,056 employees of the joint stock company, the Amur shipbuilding plant. The plant, as the majority of other plants of the defense sector, is without a state order. On this topic, the report of our special correspondents from Izhevsk. Despite the fact that during years of the landslide reckless conversion, many unique technologies were closed down. For example, certain plants, instead of air-to-air missiles, were forced to design aggregates for cabbage heads. Profits are not being realized by companies forced to adapt to civilian production. However, specified plants are producing high-quality medical and domestic technology, but their expenditures for productivity are so high that even minimum prices scare away consumers. Therefore, touring many defense plants of the country and encountering always the same problems everywhere, we were quite surprised that at the Izhevsk radio plant producing telemetric systems for all domestic space apparatus, everything is different. Until the year 1989, the defense order here was 85% of their capacity. They produced apparatus for reconnaissance satellites. Today it's 10%. However, they fully sustained the volume of yield and increased sales by 25%. And the main thing is, not once during these years did they delay salaries. The thing is that back in 1991, they began to work with the Ministry of Communications, established production of radio relay telephone complexes for urban and rural use. In December of last year, they provided communications for one of the military towns. But this radio plant is a rare case. Here, helping to escape the difficult situation were the initiatives of directors and many regular employees who incidentally together sought out wealthy clients. What should the rest do? With less initiative, but no less talent. At the defense plants, we often heard proposals to create within the government of Russia a department which would establish business contacts between the numbered companies and commercial entities. Today, everything is allowed to flow at random. Although, incidentally, the defense sector would love to be involved in its area of specialty, a shoemaker must make shoes. But for now, it happens so. Unique medical technology collects dust in basements of defense companies, and our strategic missiles either are not launched into our orbit or even, as recently in Plisetsk, don't take off. Attention. Engage the reserve launch installation. At the Volga auto plant today, they're celebrating an anniversary. Exactly 25 years ago, the first Zhiguli automobile came off the assembly belt. Our fathers built other things, and we're building an auto plant under this model beyond the Volga steppe in the end of the 60s. In a record short time, Europe's largest plant in producing low-liter vehicles was built. For a long time, the auto giant accounted for almost 10% of the gross national revenue of the country. No one had thought that a quarter century later, the plant would be on the verge of a crash. Today, in the turbulent market storms, the plant keeps afloat only at the price of unbelievable effort. For example, to provide rhythmic work of the main assembly belt, certain spare parts are produced by middlemen companies and must be delivered by helicopters. It's amazing, but a fact, it's more lucrative to buy metal and tires abroad. Hope for survival here is connected with the beginning of the production of a new family of Zhigulis, VAZ 2110. By many parameters, this family is as close as possible to other contemporary brands. The main thing is not to lose time. So again, we wouldn't have to catch up to world auto manufacturing. We're accustomed to the fact that the Constitutional Court of Russia usually deals with large-scale matters which concern prime aspects of the country's life. In this sense, today's session was unusual. In the center of the court's attention were the mutual relations of two ordinary people from the city of Astrakhan. In general, a person in Russia cannot directly approach the Constitutional Court. court, he must first pass through the steps of all the courts, from the regional to the supreme. And only later, and if he feels that his rights were not defended, can he approach the Constitutional Court. And that, given the condition that, in his opinion, the Constitution was violated, this is what Lydia Sitalova from Astrakhan did. She passed through all the required steps. In the Constitutional Court, her interests are represented by an attorney. And here's the essence of the matter. During 5 years, Sitalova lived with her friend, whom she considered to be her husband. The marriage was never registered. Now, she's claiming the residential area of her friend. During the session, it became clear that all the courts had refused her that right, because she was not registered as married in the area. But the complication lies in the fact that the law on registration was revoked, and the court's reference to the absence of registration of Sitalova were unfounded. During the session, it also turned out that the man whom Lydia feels is her husband does not intend to further her position in his own apartment. So, on one hand, the court's reference to the absence of registration seemed to be unlawful, but on the other hand, it turns out that if in the apartment of a certain individual, another person may settle in who is a completely undesirable neighbor. How will the Constitutional Court get out of this situation? We'll report this after a decision is announced. In Moscow, the creation of the Russian United Industrial Party was announced. Among the delegates of the First Congress are directors of the companies of the defense and processing sectors who, because of objective reasons, unlike, let's say, the raw materials sector, sustained greater losses during the crisis period, lost their former influence. Not succeeding at the parliamentary elections to elect their own representatives to the State Duma, the director corps of the defense companies and the processing sector were forced to seek support and to scramble among political parties, even to fight for their own budgetary funds. Today, a second attempt is being made to create a powerful association capable of influencing industrial policies. For now, in the Federative Council, it's now impossible for now to organize a majority which consistently influences national policy through creating such a political structure. I think it's possible to organize that influence. Participants of the Congress define the place of the party in the political spectrum, calling themselves centrists and distancing themselves from the right and left radical directions, which, as Arkady Volsky noted, today are still dominant in Russian society. Today, Boris Yeltsin with Viktor Chernomyrdin discussed a broad circle of problems, including those connected with the realization of the presidential decrees on economic questions. Special attention the head of state and the prime minister devoted to preparations for a new phase of privatization. Boris Yeltsin and Viktor Chernomyrdin discussed also the progress of preparations for the celebration of the 50th anniversary victory. Today, Boris Yeltsin visited Red Square and went on a 20-minute walk. He became acquainted with preparations of the main square of the Russian capital for festivities on the occasion of the 50th anniversary. The president had several conversations with Muscovites and guests of the capital. Today in Moscow, the International Scientific Conference convened called Lessons of World War II and the Significance of the Victory over Fascism. Reporting throughout the course of an hour was the chairman of the Council of the Heads of the States of the CIS and the Government of Russia, Viktor Chernomyrdin. Victory in the Great Patriotic War is worthy of being the source of pride for still many generations of people on our planet. But unfortunately, there is an opinion which exists that there was no victory, that instead of Victory Day, we should institute a day of mourning, justifying this by the great losses and our inability to fight. Evidently, there is a sense to think about what objective criteria of victory and defeat were developed by history. More than 300 of those who gathered at the conference, historians from the CIS and 20 countries of the world, will seek an answer to this question and others. Who is at fault for the defeats in the beginning of the war? What are the real losses of the Soviet Union? And the contemporary state of the armed forces was described by the Minister of Defense, Pavel Grachev. To date, the history of the Great Patriotic War was not fully studied. The conference underway should seal many of the questionable gaps in the history of the Great Patriotic War. In my hands, there is a unique book which was just published in the Moscow editing office called Stolitsa. These are letters and diaries of the German soldiers and officers who fought on the Eastern Front from 1941 to 1945. The majority of these letters in Russia are published for the first time. And so, what did the Germans write about Russians during those years? To read their notes today is not easy, remembering how much grief these people caused to our nation. But in their observations, there is very much of value and very much that is precise, that which was hidden from us for a long time for ideological reasons. For example, the German soldiers who entered our country in the summer of 1941 were unpleasantly affected by the unpaved, poor roads, unasphalted streets in these cities, and absence of sewage and plumbing in schools and the hospitals, poverty of the population, and a meager variety of goods and stores. They were also amazed at the fact that many churches for the Russians were turned into warehouses, factories, and atheistic museums. In the first months of war, almost all German soldiers noted the peace-loving village residents and their indifference to national origin of a human being in need. The German officers were greatly impressed by the relentlessness and valor of our soldiers, especially their disdain of death. The Germans who had been in Soviet prisons, among the most negative qualities of the Russian people, called stealing, drunkenness, and the not fulfilling of promises. However, they were impressed by Russian generosity, forgiving nature, and tolerance to everything foreign. When we were compiling this book for print, we were astounded that Germans, who during those years were our enemies, brought so much grief to our people. With greater understanding and respect spoke about Russia and the Russian soldier and our people than our contemporary sources of mass media. Therefore, this book, for the unbiased reader and veteran and young person, will be like a revelation. For the 50th anniversary of victory, by decree of the President of Uzbekistan, all veterans of war were awarded with medals of glory and valor. And during the years of the Great Patriotic War, Uzbekistan was in the deep rear, and replacing here in the rear, in the most difficult circumstances, in the fields and at lathes, fathers and brothers working were women and adolescents and children, all for the front, all for victory. With these words, in time limits, which seem fantastic now in the Central Asian Republic, hundreds of companies were set up and began operating those which had been evacuated from Russia. During the war years, Uzbekistan gave the front thousands of planes, hundreds of millions of projectiles and bombs, tens of thousands of various types of combat technology, tanks and armored trains. And on the fronts of the war, Uzbekistani soldiers fought. Thousands of them, still boys, went to the front voluntarily. For their combat feats, 338 soldiers and commanders from Uzbekistan were honored with the title Hero of the Soviet Union. More than 50 of them returned from war as full holders of the Order of Glory. Today, with white temples, the undefeated soldiers often gather here at the Council of Veterans of War and Labor, on whose initiative, on the eve of the celebration, 32 volumes of books of memories were published, which on the basis of archive materials and materials published during war years and letters, eternalize the memories of 400,000 killed and missing Uzbekistanis. A deep bow of reverence and memory eternal. Today, ancient Pskov was the center of a national celebration dedicated to the victory of the Russian soldiers in the battle on ice on Chudskoye Lake. Near the monument to Alexander Nevsky, the ceremony of handing over the relay baton of victory occurred, to be carried along the border of the independent states, and on the 28th of May will end in Moscow near the monument to the border troops who died in action. Today, the service of blessing of the bells was held, given as a gift by the President Boris Yeltsin to the Cathedral of St. Alexander Nevsky in the city of Pskov. This is the beginning of nationwide Russian celebrations dedicated to the 775th anniversary of Alexander Nevsky. Andrei Kozyrev found unsatisfactory the situation of Russian-speaking peoples in many of the CIS countries. According to him, the most visible confirmation of that is the unceasing flow of immigrants into Russia. Today, at the meeting of the Council on Foreign Policy, Andrei Kozyrev said that defending the rights of the Russian-speaking population in the near abroad, Moscow intends refused to use the entire arsenal of internationally recognized methods from dialogue to military economic pressure. The Minister of Foreign Affairs had warned against a dictate, reshuffling of borders, characteristic of the tendencies to the south. The nationalistic fervor around this question and the pressing concern for Russians, which turns into the worst form of Russophobia. All of this is the direct path to the isolation of Russia, or to even a Yugoslavian scenario on the enormous expanses of the former Soviet Union. One may expect that in the very near future, the Foreign Affairs staff will embark on the realization of the idea of Kozyrev, who feels that the tested model of cooperation among border regions in Europe will help to alleviate the problem of the rights of our compatriots, even if only on an administrative level. However, judging from today's discussion, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs will remain for a long time an object of criticism by supporters of harsh foreign political course and those who feel that only reintegration of the post-Soviet expanse can guarantee the rights of the Russian-speaking population in the near abroad. Complicated relations between the executive and legislative branches of government are typical not just for Russia or the CIS countries, but even for many countries with a rich democratic tradition. An example of that in the report of our personal correspondent in London, Alexander Malikov. 2 times a week for 15 minutes, the deputies are permitted, in parliamentary jargon, to roast the Prime Minister on the grill. Officially, this ritual has a more neutral name, the Prime Minister's question and answer period. The problem is not so much in the name as in the essence. Any deputy has the right to raise any problem. The severity of discussion often reaches the top register of vocal capabilities and acceptable etiquette, and often turns into a verbal tussle between the ruling party and the opposition. 1 year ago, so as to reduce the fervor, John Major supported the idea of reforming the traditional verbal duel between the head of the government and the deputies. The former Prime Minister of Great Britain, Sir Edward Heath, who received an honorary status of the Father of the House of Commons because he has served as a deputy for more than 45 years, feels that this ritual has become more theatrical and has lost its significant status which it had in the 1950s, 60s, and back in the 70s. And yet, he is against cancelling television broadcasting of the Prime Minister's question period. Sir Edward Heath and the other former British Prime Minister, Lord Culligan, suggest the expromptum aspect be removed from the parliamentary question period and that questions be asked according to a previous agenda. As usual, Margaret Thatcher has her opinion on this problem. In a letter to a special committee, she recommended that all be left as it is. She spoke out against increasing the time for responses of the Prime Minister from 15 minutes to half an hour or 1 hour. The new regulation, she noted, can give an advantage to the Prime Minister over the deputies, so Thatcher, figuratively speaking, does not want to remove future premiers from the grill of sharp deputy questions. A former wife of the South African President, Nelson Mandela, the prominent political figure, Winnie Mandela, has found herself in the center of another scandal. Almost 1 month ago, the President, Nelson Mandela, decided to order the Deputy Minister of Art and Culture and Technologies, Winnie Mandela, to retire into retirement. However, she managed to protest that decision. The history with the dismissal was so broadly publicized that Winnie Mandela, so as to avoid a major scandal, decided by her own desire to leave her post. An American Air Force airplane crashed while attempting an unplanned landing at the airport in this city, Alexander City. All of those who were on board and 6 passengers died. The reasons for the crash are being clarified. The battle with crime is a real problem for many countries of the world. Extraordinary measures in that sense are being undertaken in Brazil. Our personal correspondents report. In Rio de Janeiro, the operation Rio 2 has begun. 20,000 policemen and Army special squads together will uproot in the city organized crime. The first such operation, Rio 1, which lasted for 4 months and ended just recently in February, brought no significant results and only initially briefly frightened the criminals. Later, the mafia, which was forced by 2/3 to reduce its purchase and sale of drugs and weapons, has begun to make money in other ways. The assaults on banks and automatic cash machines has doubled, as well as kidnapping for ransom. The President of Brazil, Fernando Henrique Cardoso, and the Governor of the state of Rio de Janeiro, Marcelo Alencar, signing a joint agreement on the new military police operation, recognized impermissible the fact that the favelas, the ghettos of the city, there's more than 1 million population, as previously are controlled by the mafia. On roads in suburban Rio de Janeiro, 830 patrol units are on duty, and orders for the arrest have been issued for more than 2,000 criminal heads taken under special patrol are Ultra centers. For the first time, a military detail appeared on Carcavada Hill, crowned by the famous statue of Christ, the deliverer. Now delivering Rio from crime, he will be assisted by the army. In a moment, Daria Czerwoninka will tell you about today's sports news. Before that, one more report, also relative to sport. With this, I bid you farewell. The Sports Society Spartak tomorrow turns 60. Among delegates of today's anniversary Congress, there were many Spartak members whose contribution to the successes of domestic sport doesn't need to be remembered. During these years, the Society prepared 102 Olympic champions. Spartak was also record in numbers. Its ranks united 20 million people. As one of the founders of the Society said, its honorary president, Nikolai Petrovich Starostin, Spartak awarded everyone with health and confidence in oneself. The main thing is to rely on yourselves and do what your sports experience tells you and your rules of life. However, the contributions of the society were not taken into account when, in 1987, Spartak was disbanded. But the Spartak people always stood out because of stoic fighting spirit and devotion to idea. And the society was reborn in Russia and many republics of the former Soviet Union. Spartak existed. It was insulted. And it rose back to its feet and now will never relinquish its place. It will continue to live and it will return its name as it was and move forward toward victory, toward great and interesting victories. And the main thing is it will fulfill its basic calling. We must help our people become as strong as it always was. Good evening. I congratulate the Sports Society Spartak, and now we'll tell you about the news of Russian athletes. The fourth seed of the world, the Sochi resident Evgeny Kafelnikov, at the prestigious tennis tournament in the French Nice, beat the American David Wheaton, losing in the first set 3-9. Kafelnikov later did not go on to lose a single one. At the World Soccer Junior Championships in Qatar, the Russian team tied 0-0 with the Brazilian team and now has 2 points. In the last meet with the team of Syria, our team will be pleased only with victory, because only in that case will it continue its battle in the quarterfinals. From the 19th to the 23rd of April in Moscow, the Moscow Hockey Club Wings the Soviets is holding a tournament for youth teams, the Victory Cup. And so the president of the club, Igor Dmitriev, says a word. This will be simply an international tournament with the participation of the Canadian teams and the teams of our club. First match is to be held tomorrow at 6 p.m. And all hockey fans who want to learn what is new in the NHL, I wish to announce that tomorrow, Channel 1 at 10:45, they'll be able to see the new program, NHL, A Look from the Inside. Good evening. The northwest of Russia and the Baltic countries, as previously, will be under the influence of a cyclone with a center over south of Norway. Therefore, in the Kaliningrad district, the Baltic countries, in Karelia and Murmansk area, prevalently cloudy weather is expected with some patches of isolated rain. Temperatures of +5 to 10. In the Nenets Autonomous District, in the Republic of Komi, the Volgovyatsk and central regions, the weather is better under the influence of an anticyclone. It will continue to be partly cloudy, yet dry, +15 to 20 degrees. degrees. Brief precipitation is possible only on the Arctic coast. Here, it's +5 to 10. That same anticyclone will bring good weather to the residents of the central parts of Russia, with temperatures of +15 to 20 tomorrow. On the central and lower Volga, as high as +25. Gradually, the weather will improve in Belarus, in Ukraine, and in Moldova. Under the influence of an area of high pressure, rain will cease and the sun will peak out, and temperatures will creep up to the point of +14. A small cyclone over the northern Caucasus and atmospheric fronts again will worsen the weather in the south of Russia, in the Rostov area, Krasnodar, Stavropol Rim areas, on the Black Sea resorts, and in the northern foothills of the Caucasus. Thunderstorms will pass through. Temperatures here of +16 to 21 degrees. Beyond the Caucasus, variably cloudy skies will continue, and in the afternoon, torrential rains and thunderstorms will pass through. Temperatures of +17 to 22. In St. Petersburg, prevalence of cloudy weather with some isolated brief rain at night, +3 to 5, during the day, +6 to 8 degrees. In the capital, variably cloudy skies, no precipitation, temperatures at night of +7 to 9 degrees, during the day 17 to 19. Warm, dry weather will continue over the next 2 days. I hope that the forecast will make you happy. All the best.